Hello and welcome to BCP, the Business Continuity Podcast from Inveroy Crisis Management. Brought to you today by Matthew Wardner and...
me, Toby Ingram.
And today we've got four things that we'd like to talk about. In particular, three of which are in the news and one is of my travels. The first three, the Saudi drone attacks, the impact and the reasons behind the collapse of Thomas Cook, and the third topic, glaciers and what's happening to them around the world and their significance. My travels is my trip to Mexico and whilst I was there being involved in an earthquake drill and what we can learn from it. So, turning firstly to Saudi drones, or more particular the attack on the Saudi oil field by a drone. I think most people will now know what this is and what we're talking about, but in essence, the Yemen's Houthi rebel organisation attacked the Saudi Sheba field in southeast Saudi with at least one drone. There are talks of more than one, up to a dozen drones, caused a fire that led to a disruption of production, but thank goodness caused no casualties. The rebel leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi has claimed in a television speech that the attack was a message to the Saudis and the UAE, who have been trying to unseat the rebels from Yemen, or Yemen's capital Sana'a. The statistics behind this attack are quite eye-watering in as far as the damage that it does. The oil field is state-owned by Aramco and pumps 1 million barrels of oil a day. And for those that aren't oil and gas aficionados, a barrel is approximately 150 litres, so each barrel is 2 tanks of the average car's fuel tank. So 1 million barrels is 2 million full cars of fuel every day from that one oil field. The field does hold 14 billion barrels of high-value oil and is believed to be approximately 5% of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's total reserves. So it's a big deal when this is hit. And some reports estimate that the production from that one field is 5% of the world's use of oil. So when it's destroyed or knocked out for a short period, it has an effect. And from a business continuity point of view, yes, obviously, if you're not producing 1 million barrels, and I think, quick rule of thumb that the average barrel price at the moment is roughly $60. So every day it's not producing, that's $60 million of lost income. It doesn't take much to start to add up to even the Saudis start to notice that in their budget. Toby, what do you think?
It's an interesting one, Matthew, because of the context, and this is one that's all about context. So, because Aramco is the state-owned oil business, if you hit Aramco, you hit the Saudi state, and that's not often the case with energy companies around the world. Most often they're privately owned or privately invested in. They're very rarely these days tied to a state, but in the case of Aramco it is. So the Houthi movement has been fighting the Saudi-led coalition since 2015, and the Saudis launch airstrikes nearly every day against the Houthis in Yemen. Houthis respond with missiles into Saudi. They've been blamed for drone attacks on the Sheba gas facility and other oil facilities this year, and thought to be backed by Iran. But the so what of this drone attack is that the Houthis have significantly now increased their leverage over Saudi Arabia because they can affect the Saudi state. It's not known whether they've civilianized, or whether they've weaponized civilian drones, or whether they've received important technical assistance from Iran. And it is very unlikely that these were flown from outside Saudi Arabia, so they had some help from inside the kingdom, which is what they said in their press statement. But the point is that this drone technology is now democratized. It's available to anybody who wants to go out and buy it, whether it's a civilianized drone or a military drone, doesn't matter. You can probably get it.
It's interesting because offshore Europe, at the start of the month, I was talking to a gentleman who runs a company, and they're talking about over-the-horizon resupply of oil rigs in the North Sea using drones. So that range must be significant. And so if you're the attacker, it's quite a safe way of doing your attack, I would have thought. It's a bit of a sort of no-brainer. Why wouldn't you do that rather than putting people?
I'm guessing it's more attractive than a suicide vest option. I don't know, I've never been in that situation, but yeah, it's definitely worth considering. And of course, oil fields or oil installations, whether offshore or onshore, are very, very difficult to defend against a physical threat because they're big, they're dispersed, they're usually remote, and whether somebody's flying a drone in from within line of sight or from over the horizon, they're still pretty difficult to detect.
Yeah. And I guess this attack, if they're talking of 10 to 12 drones all hitting, but I assume different points of the infrastructure, as a responder, you're not sure which one to respond to first. Your firefighting capability, you're accounting for people, going to muster that chaos that must cause, because traditionally an item of equipment would fail, and you then isolate that area, shut down production or whatever to put the fire out in one area. If you've now got 10 areas simultaneously all bursting into flames at the same time, you've overwhelmed the response capability, and I assume your ability to put the fire out is much more difficult because you've got not one fire, but you've got 10 fires, and yet you've built your response capability on a single event.
You're likely to have, although the reports from Saudi were that there were no casualties caused in this particular attack, if you have a swarm of drones carrying ordnance, there is a likelihood of multiple casualties. So you're going to have to deal with that situation as well, as well as the fires. And the thought of a swarm of drones attacking an oil field is, I think, something that bears a lot of thinking about, because I don't think that the industry as a whole has considered this yet.
No, and I remember talking 4 or 5 years ago to a company in northern Iraq about the ISIS threat, and are they really vulnerable to a small arms attack compared to a drone attack? And I was laughed at the time. 5 years later, or 4 years later, here we are, and what goes round full circle. So no, and the effect on things like supply chains.
I think if you wanted to affect an oil field but didn't want to go to it, you could absolutely affect the supplies to it, because whether they're by ship, if it's offshore, or often in these cases by a single very narrow road, you only need to hit one tanker on the road, and that's everything else stacked up behind it, and you're stopping production or you're stopping the outflow of oil. Think about hitting the pipeline with a drone. Many of the pipelines are above the surface. Why would they not be? And
it's interesting. I saw a tweet from the Commander Field Army, Lieutenant General Ivan Jones, has an initiative for the British Army talking about looking at the next wave of technology. And the image that's held is a handheld, literally 4 inches by 2 inch type size drone that provides the surveillance capability now or part of the surveillance capability for the army. Well, if the British Army are using that type of technology, then surely our adversaries, whether that be ours as in the British state or any other state actor, or whether it's your business, if someone is trying to put you out of business or trying to attack you, they don't need to be obvious anymore. They can be very subtle. They can be observing you while you're doing something, whether that be preparing for a rugby match, Rugby World Cup on at the moment, a drone in the air that you can't see is there recording your moves, or whether in this case it's a mass attack on a site. The technology has moved on, and trying to defend something with barbed wire and gate guards is a bit basic. And from a resilience point of view, therefore, it just adds another layer of complexity into, okay, there's a new threat in town, what are we going to do about it? And sadly, putting your head in the sand is not going to be the answer.
No, although as so often happens throughout history, the standing defences are not optimised for a new threat. So drones are very small, fly very low, very slow, difficult for traditional air defense systems to intercept and detect. So the Chinese appear to be leading the charge in defense against drones for their state-owned facilities, extra radars, infrared detection, radio environment monitoring to track the control signals and detect the drones, and then guns, missiles, laser, your own hunter drones and jammers to engage them. So there are defences there, but they are awfully expensive both in technology and manpower.
Yeah.
And so I think the key aspect here is, if you're looking at an energy installation, work out whether somebody wants to attack it.
Yeah, and I guess just final thought. Yes, this has happened in Saudi Arabia. Lots of discussion on is Iran backing the Houthi rebels, etc. Is it impossible, that sort of thing, in the UK or any other industrialised world? We've seen talks of Extinction Rebellion disrupting flights out of Heathrow with drones. Is there any reason that couldn't be turned to a more sinister?
None whatsoever.
It's an interesting thought, isn't it? That whether you are a business in pick a city, Sheffield or Saudi Arabia, it's if someone wants to do you harm, that is a new actor in the pack, and one to think about.
Indeed.
Yeah, bit of doom and gloom there, I'm afraid. But moving from one story of doom and gloom to the next, Thomas Cook. The sad collapse of Thomas Cook, global brand, catchphrases of "don't just book it, Thomas Cook it." That people of a certain age, i.e. me and Toby, have been brought up on. Went into administration at the start of this week, and a very, very sad story. Any particular thoughts on Thomas Cook?
It is going to be quoted in future years as an example of how not to do business, because founded in 1841, nationalised between 1948 and 1972, which I didn't know until I read it this morning, and the collapse of all of its operations has left 160,000 travellers stranded, forcing the largest peacetime repatriation ever, and we're hearing stories about this daily. And the question is, how does a travel company go out of business at a time when more and more people are taking overseas trips? So here,
good point.
This is the case where the context is everything. The British travel market is stronger than ever, and it's estimated that 60% of the population went to overseas vacations in 2018, up on the 57% that did the previous year. But the point is that habits have changed. The growing popularity of city breaks over traditional beach destinations that Thomas Cook had specialised in.
Those traditional 1970s sort of package holidays of everyone's going to Torremolinos and crowded beaches and so on. And I guess in those days, you went into a shop and you looked at their brochure and you bought it largely off the 2 or 3 pictures that were in the brochure and perhaps 100 words of script. You don't do that anymore.
And it's not just the numbers, because it's estimated now that only 1 in 7 clients visit a travel agency on which Thomas Cook's model was based.
Yep.
And those that do are generally aged over 65 and with less money to spend. So we're not quite over 65 yet. That's our sort of.
But I haven't been in Thomas Cook for a long time. But is this a horizon scanning issue from a resilience point of view, or is it something else?
Yeah, I think it's horizon scanning, because context and environment is everything, and if you don't recognise how the environment around you is changing, then you are going to fall behind your competition, which Thomas Cook did. To be fair to them, they did try to adapt, firstly by buying My Travel, an online travel booking system, but in doing so they lost more than $1 billion and gave themselves some unsustainable debt. They tried to sell their airlines, and the cost of maintaining 560 high street travel agencies throughout the UK just left them too vulnerable.
Which sounds similar to problem with high street presence that we've discussed in the past with the likes of House of Fraser or wherever, and their demise recently, that the high street is dying because everything is going online, and Thomas Cook therefore has been a similar victim. And would I be right? This sounds we did a recent piece of work for a client and looked at some horizon scanning examples, one of which we discussed was Kodak, and the fact that everyone now has more photographs than we know what to do with, and yet the world's leading camera provider and film provider, Kodak, went out of business just at the time that took off. And indeed the same with Nokia, that went out of business, or perhaps not out of business, but isn't the market leader that it was, just at the time that a high percentage of people now have at least one mobile phone, if not two. But I guess they're not mobile phones, they're smartphones, and that was the difference. So is this an example?
Kodak is the great story, of course, because they were destroyed by digital photography. They made the fundamental error of believing that everybody would still want printed photographs, but very few people did. Everybody carried photographs on their phones, on their laptops, etc.
And I guess we just ping it to someone and say, have a look at my photograph, without having to stand and look at it together in a coffee shop.
You don't have a photograph album anymore. Very few people have montages on their walls. And the irony is that the organisation that first invented digital photography was Kodak.
Yeah.
So defeated by their own technology, which other people used much better than they did. And in this case of Thomas Cook, they committed the cardinal business sin of gaining an increasing share of a decreasing market. So they cornered the market.
Sorry, just run that past me again. An increasing share of a decreasing
market. That is the road to ruin.
And the scale of decrease is much more than the scale of increase. Yes, got you.
Because they got an increasing share of the least profitable segment of holiday customers, and they processed them through a channel of shops, travel agencies that generated comparatively high cost, which incurred mounting and unsustainable debt, whereas 6 out of 7 people were going to other channels. So you cornered the market, but the market was dying, and you didn't recognise it. And the subtext of this story is that I heard on the news this morning that the accountants, Ernst & Young, and was it Ernst & Winnie? I can't remember.
Ernst & Young now, used to be Ernst & Winnie. Yep.
And PricewaterhouseCoopers. There are calls for them to be investigated, because how did they not see a financial problem of this size coming?
Yeah.
A £250 accounting error. Yes, you don't spot that, but a financial hole of this size, you can't walk into it without knowing the hole is there.
Yeah, and I guess that the figure that's been quoted is that the UK government didn't fund a 200 million request for support, but that's the request for support that was left after the banks had said, we'll give you, X hundred million already. So, and I saw an interesting graphic that showed the losses, and for the last 15 years or so, they've gone profit, loss, profit, loss, profit, loss, and then in the last 18 months, it's gone, that loss has quadrupled to something like 1.6 billion, which is quite a lot of money. In anyone's bank books, really. And
you're going to see that coming.
Yeah.
You have to, and if you don't, your accountant certainly
should. And it is that it's always very easy sat on our podcast bench to look at these things and go, how did you not see that coming? And it is interesting that chief executives, directors and so on are paid a considerable amount of money to see these things coming. And yet to not see it, I hope there is an investigation, because that seems a tremendous shame for all those people who have booked holidays that now won't happen because of the loss. So it's not just the 160,000 who are away this week, it's those who've booked a year in advance. So there are millions of people who have now lost out. Anyway, enough on that.
That are being thrown out of hotels. Back, or those that are being trapped in hotels until they've paid for their extra time.
Effectively held hostage by your hotelier.
Yeah.
That you can't leave until you've paid your debt. Well, it's not your debt, it's Thomas Cook's debt, but you're the person sat in the middle, completely ill-equipped for dealing with that situation.
And
but interestingly,
air crews landing and being told, thank you, you're now redundant.
Yeah. But the response, I think, of the staff in the international airports has been phenomenal. That from almost a standing start, within hours, they are there with a line. This is what we're going to do. This is what you need to know. And the story for people coming back has been that they've been very well looked after and they've been kept informed. So that crisis comms piece is perhaps one that we'll look at in the future as professionals in this area and say that was quite good. And whether Operation Matterhorn, as it's been called, is an off-the-shelf operation that they just adjust to suit the circumstances, I don't know, given Monarch has gone out recently. but it is an interesting, just how well they did from as I say, a standing start. Anyway, conscious that time is marching on, and we've got another couple of things to talk about. The next topic that we wanted to introduce our listeners to was a variation on an old theme, but on the subject of water shortages around the world, glaciers melting, etc. And it comes at a time when there's an article today being the Wednesday the 25th of September. Toby, what have you found?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and as you say, triggered by the article today, which we'll come on to a little later. But to give you some background and context, by 2050 it's estimated that the world demand for water will increase by 20 to 30% to an annual consumption of 5 million cubic kilometres. A 20 to 30% increase in a single resource within our lifetimes is big. This is huge stuff. The amount of water needed to irrigate crops is likely to increase by 40%, and the manufacturing sector's demand for water could be 400% higher. And we don't have enough water now. So,
because we've spoken in the past about Chennai running out of water, about Cape Town running out of water, and not just sort of, oh gosh, we need to turn our hoses off, but we have no water, which is no drinking water, nothing for cattle, nothing for crops, nothing. So this is big, yeah.
This is big, and a third of the water's large. It's a mouth in Shakespeare. A third of the world's large aquifers are being drained at an unsustainable rate, i.e., you're taking more out than flows back in through rainfall.
Okay. So if you're the listener, this isn't for your benefit. Toby's looking at me as though I didn't know what aquifer meant there, so apologies. Anyway, sorry.
So rivers that are fed from glaciers in areas like the Alps, the Andes, Central Asia, are going to become much less reliable, if not dry up completely. There'll be a surge as the glaciers melt and the rivers fill up for a few years.
Yep. So we might get a false sense of security that no, everything's fine, and then suddenly, bang, we've got no meltwater from glaciers, and we don't have any from any other source either. Okay.
Absolutely. So moving on to Italy, which is one of those.
Interesting case. That this is another thing that we picked up, isn't it? From this is I think you're going to tell me about a Times article from the 9th of August if our listeners want to dig out any more on that. But Italy seems to be an interesting case study of both what's going wrong, but also what they're doing about it.
Yeah, interesting stuff. So the surface of alpine glaciers has halved in the last 100 years, but in Italy 70% of that reduction has occurred in the last 30 years. So this is moving fast, and it's accelerating. And the glaciers under 3,500 metres are likely to disappear completely in that time frame. So by 2050, you've got new lakes being formed of melted ice on the top of mountains during freak heat waves, and many ski resorts, whilst you can create artificial snow for skiing in temperatures like 15 degrees, many of those resorts are looking at the prospect now of abandonment.
Yeah, because I guess if you go skiing, you don't just want to ski in somewhere that you could go and ski in your own backyard, in an artificial ski slope. There's one in the centre of Dubai, there's one in the centre of Glasgow, neither of which are renowned for their skiing normally, but you can create that. So why would you want to go to Italy or Switzerland or the traditional mass tourist markets to go skiing if it's just a 400 metre by 100 metre artificial slope that you can go to anywhere? All those routes have gone, those mogul fields, and I guess to replace them is prohibitively expensive because they're put in there at the moment for free. A little bit of management, don't get me wrong, piece bashers and so on, but it's
and therefore scale of what you would have to try to recreate artificially. I don't see how.
And that tourist income, the value of property, during the season, from everything from ski lessons, ski hire, the travel, everything that goes into that. It must be massive for those regions.
In some cases, it's the only thing there is
in
the region. In the UK, we can look at a microcosmic example of Aviemore, and I think, as the media reported, the mountain went broke.
It just takes one or two bad seasons, and
plus some cost mismanagement, etc., and the effect on the community is dramatic. Big.
Yeah.
So This is
I guess they might find something else, downhill mountain biking or something, but it is a change, and it's another going back to horizon scanning. But we're going quite literally off-piste. From where we were trying to be here about water. Sorry about that, listeners.
No,
but
don't worry. But the point is, find something else before disaster strikes and your environment changes that dramatically. Anyway, back to water. You're now going to talk about the news report today.
The news report today is looking at the idea of the Italian authorities closing roads and evacuating mountain huts after experts have warned that part of the glacier on Mont Blanc could collapse. So we're not just talking about it's going to melt a bit quicker. We are talking about 250,000 cubic meters of ice being in danger of breaking off. And I would try and pronounce the name of the glacier, the something?
Planpansieux.
Thank you very much. Glacier. This is 250,000 cubic meters.
Yeah, that's big.
That's big, isn't it? And if that breaks off, if I remember rightly, momentum is mass times velocity. There's a lot of mass there. It's falling from height. Gravity. It's going to come crashing down that valley and take out most things in its path.
I would assume so.
And hence, this idea of doing something about it before it does that is entirely logical. There are reports of it saying that it's already moving 50 to 60 centimetres every day. So at some point, that the classic quote we use of we're gathering the speed of the ball as it goes down the hill. Well, this is a very large ball, and it's starting to move down the hill. And as it gets faster, that 50 to 60 becomes 60 to 70, 70 to 80, and suddenly it's not stopping, I guess is the risk. And anything in its way is going to get destroyed.
And you don't quite know at the moment what its way is going to be. You can have a look and think, well, it might slide down that valley or it might slide down that one.
Yeah.
Or it might break up and slide down both. But yeah, as you say, it's now moving visibly. A glacier is moving visibly. This is not geological time. This is actual real time.
And I'm no geographer, but my limited understanding and knowledge of the Ice Age and the formation of valleys and so on, when a glacier moves, it moves everything in its path with it. So the potential isn't just it'll knock a car or a house over, it could move a whole valley and change the geography of the landscape.
It would be a geological event.
Yeah, so it is a big deal, and well done the Italians for protecting their people before it happens, because that's one element of a disaster that we now may not be facing. But it doesn't. You can't change the fact that this glacier is now on the march, and at some point it could become a catastrophic event, and it'll be one perhaps to watch in the weeks and months to come.
Absolutely, and I think, as you say, well done the Italians, because the best sort of disaster is the one that you don't have to go through, or the one that you've pre-mitigated, which I think they've done everything they can, and of course they don't know when this event's going to happen. It could be this year, it could be in 10 years' time. That's still a very short period of time in geological time.
Yeah.
So they've done the right thing, even though it will be, it will change the community, because roads are closed, mountain huts are evacuated, etc., etc. If the glacier or any other glacier does break off and slide downhill, you can hope that it might wake the world up to the water situation, which is really, really serious.
Yeah.
And again, back to the UK, Scottish Water own figures show that Scotland alone is losing 480 million litres per day through leaking pipes. I think,
now,
a
bit of a madness, and I know they're doing everything they can.
Scottish Water will say, but we've halved that over the last decade. Great, but 480 million litres of water is a lot of water.
Yeah.
So I don't think it can any longer be considered acceptable for that to be happening when this critical resource we're running out.
Yeah, and again, it neatly ties us back to some of our previous topics of ageing infrastructure. Is the pipes were put in there by, what do the Victorians do for us type thing. But the Victorians put the pipe work in there, and they've been added to over the times, but they are now old. And to dig up the roads, dig up what we've got, to take them out and replace them with something that is more robust is damaging to our productivity today. But if we don't do it today, our tomorrow could be even worse. And therefore it's that spend a little bit of time doing it now, or be prepared to spend a lot of time recovering from it later.
Yes.
When it fails. But so an interesting one there on glaciers, and where that might lead, and perhaps something to keep an eye on amongst the many other topics that we touch on. But the Italian glacier front seems to be a topic very much of the moment, and indeed ties into water shortage as well. That and rising sea heights. Heard today that it's very difficult to get insurance, and people are being encouraged not to live near coastlines, even in the UK, because of rising seas, etc. So the whole issue, they're all interlinked, and from a business resilience perspective, there are overlaps there on thinking through what would happen to my business if this happens. And hopefully, for most of us, we're not going to run out of water. But if you are operating in an arid environment, and it's only going to get worse, then how long are you operating there? What's your backup plan, etc. Bringing in bottled water may become more difficult if the place you're bringing it in from runs out. If you're relying on Chennai as your source for back office support, is it going to be there, etc. So some interesting thoughts. I just wanted to talk finally about my recent travels. Been to Mexico City last week. Absolutely fascinating and fantastic trip. But whilst we were there, I hadn't realised that every year on the 19th of September, the Mexican authorities run a national earthquake response drill, because the earthquake threat is quite high, and they've had many incidents of damage caused by earthquakes. Last one, 2017, I think. Therefore, they have taken the decision on a national basis to do the rehearsals. And the alarm goes off. We were on the 36th floor of our building, modern building, built to withstand, but we still went through the drill. Go to your temporary refuge, your secure area, account for everyone, move down the fire escape, out into a safe area, accounted for again, listen to advice. Really, really powerful to see tens of thousands of people responding to the fire alarms across the city, or the evacuation alarms rather, across the city going off, to tell people what to do and to rehearse the response to something that has been identified as a significant risk. Which I think that's my overall point of this, is that if you know that there is a significant risk and that there is nothing that you can do to stop that event occurring, i.e. a natural disaster, doesn't it make sense to rehearse what you're going to do in the event that happens? And yes, you can practice in your own business unit, your own office block, but actually to coordinate that response across a country is a massive undertaking, and well done the Mexican authorities for doing that. Thank goodness the lifts were working when we went back in, because walking up the 36 flights of stairs might have been one or two more casualties involved. But no, it was an excellent drill, and one that I was pleased to see and be involved with, I must admit.
Great stuff.
The other thing we had the pleasure of being involved in earlier in the month was Offshore Europe, the exhibition at the conference centre in Aberdeen. Went on for 4 days. We were there for a couple of days. Really great to see an increase in footfall at the conference, and an overall positive atmospherics about what's going on. But also interesting, we managed to sit in on a couple of presentations looking at artificial intelligence and robotics and what that means for the oil and gas industry, which was reassuring, because we've obviously spoken about that in the past, and what that means. And again, reassuringly, we were on message with what the large players were talking about, and the impact that can have on the business. So that's it from me for this edition of our podcast. Anything from you, Toby?
Just a final one to end on, if I may, please, Matthew. University College London,
Yes.
God bless them, are very good at studying weather.
Okay.
And they believe that another beast from the east is due this winter. Probably going to be colder than the 2018 version, with snow potentially lasting for 3 to 4 weeks. Just not quite sure where it's coming yet. So having logged that, any business that's vulnerable to weather.
Okay.
So a business which has to physically move stuff or people. Amazon, any fulfillment company,
Yep.
dispatching out. I would just remind you of the sort of the standard preparations. Watch the weather forecast so you see it coming. Protect your people, so identify what are your essential outputs and which people are essential to those outputs.
Yep.
Can those people work from home?
Yep.
If so, enable them to do it with things like extra software licenses. If not, make sure you can get them to work safely. So you might consider hiring 4x4s because people might not be able to use their cars.
I guess the other thing there is that some people, schools may close because teachers can't get in, and now you've got the problem of how do we cater for a workforce that suddenly has to stay behind to look after children at home, whether that be the mother or the father. Someone has to look after a child in a house. So it's you can provide the resources to get the person in, but you might need to provide a creche or some form of facility to cater for the children as well, if that person is essential for your business.
Absolutely, and you'll need to enable that as an employer.
Yeah.
Have a look at your suppliers and model a 4-week block on your supplies. Anything that's critical, stockpile it or find an alternative supplier. So enable yourself to continue operating. Check your insurance.
Okay.
How completely are you insured against weather? Also, model your cash flow against a weather disruption of 4 weeks.
Yeah, because last time Beast from the East was about a week, 10 days.
Yeah,
so yes, we all saw pictures, if I remember rightly, of supermarket shelves empty of bread and milk, i.e. the stuff that if it's not picked up from the farm, because it's all very well going from the distribution yard to the shop, but it needs to come from the farm. And the farm is quite often down a remote track that doesn't get a gritter down it, so how do you get your big lorry to go to the farm to pick up the raw material in the first place? So that there's a bit of a difference between a week and a month.
There is a big difference. Some good clients that we work for at the moment, and these are the good ones. They do have backup generators, and they have a 2-day fuel supply, and that's the good clients.
Yeah.
So if you're modelling 4 weeks, you either need to everybody work from home, or you need a lot more fuel, which you won't be able to get in
if the fuel supply is disrupted because of traffic chaos. Yeah.
And also, if nobody in your office can remember the last time the backup generator was tested, I think you should test it.
Yeah, and it's always the same every year when millions of people across the country turn on their heating on sometime around September, and they find that the valve has leaked or whatever because it hasn't been run for 5 months. Multiply that up in scale for your generator to power your office, and it's the same problem, isn't it? That you get what you inspect, not what you expect. So get out there, inspect it, check it, and provide yourself with some assurance that whilst everything else is going wrong, at least the generator is going to work, and it's going to get some fuel, and it's going to make your lives that bit easier.
Absolutely, and maybe stockpile food basics, either at home or at the office. Non-perishable canned goods and big freezers.
And I guess a little bit of that over time, so we're not all rushing out tomorrow and buying up everything, means a couple of extra cans of this, a couple of extra bottles of that over time doesn't affect your household budget dramatically, and at the same time doesn't empty the shelves overnight as a result of the Inveroy podcast.
And if you have, I wish we would if you have anything which is vulnerable to flood, so if you store stuff in a basement or if you've got a leaky roof, read National Archives of Scotland or various other clients that we talk about with things in basements and cellars, move it, protect it, because if this beast does hit, there is likely to be an awful lot of wet stuff around, either snow melting or rain. And
I guess things like sandbags or bags in which you can put something that is going to act like a sandbag. It's not rocket science to think about these things beforehand, but you would be foolish to expect a council to guarantee that they're going to be able to turn up when they've got other priorities, old folks' homes, hospitals, schools, whatever, saving lives, and you're worried about your business. Well, your business is hugely important to you, but it's not compared to other priorities for a council. Yes, you may have insurance, but I'm sure you'd rather have your business than be claiming on your insurance because you've just lost everything that you've spent years building up.
Absolutely.
So, and that doesn't matter whether you're a massive multinational or a young startup. Yeah.
So this is common sense stuff, and one of the best predicting sources around, University College London, tell us it is coming this winter.
Yeah.
So if you end up not prepared for it, well, you should listen to more of our podcasts.
And I guess every business has to have a fire plan because fire is a major risk.
Yes.
This is the UK. We know that it gets cold in winter. We know that it rains a lot. We know that it snows. Not every business has a plan for that disruption. Well, hang on a second. That 1 in every 25, 1 in every 30 year winter seems to be coming around a little bit more often, once every 10 years, and therefore having some form of thought process that's gone into it, and you've made a decision on your actions beforehand, is just common sense. Okay.
And model it on a 4-week disruption.
Yeah. Great. In which case, listeners, thank you very much for your time. That's us for another month. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you've got anything that you want to let us know about, by all means email us. Email is bcp@inveroy.com, and we look forward to speaking to you again next month. Thanks. Bye-bye.